Good afternoon and welcome to Lombok in Indonesia for this, the Indonesian Grand Prix, just 4 days on, from Marc Marquez wrapping up his 7th MotoGP crown in that incredibly dramatic and what would turn out to be emotional Japanese Grand Prix. It's Jack Appleyard and Lewis Suddaby here to preview what to expect here in Mandalika. And as you can see, we are shade seekers, shall I say, because it is pretty toasty out there today. A real feel with the humidity taken into account of over 40 degrees. This is without doubt the toughest test on the calendar for the riders up and down the MotoGP pit lane. It's a tough test for someone going into pit lane as well, which is going to be something to try and tackle throughout the course of the weekend. But of course, there's the big question coming into this now is, what kind of a Marc Marquez are we going to see? That the ultimate goal is wrapped up, he admitted, throughout the course of the weekend, and we could see afterwards with that release of emotion just how much it meant to him securing that 7th MotoGP crown and how much the weight, the pressure, the expectation weighed on him throughout the course of the weekend. That, of course, has now been released. He's free. In one of our behind-the-scenes videos, Davide Tarozzi told him he can now go out there and have fun. Marc Marquez relaxed and having fun. Surely that's going to send a huge warning signal to everybody else. Yeah,
we're going to hear from Marc Marquez shortly where he answers that very question, how he's feeling coming into this weekend. But there's two different ways it can go, really. Either he's freed up the pressure, which he said was on his shoulders much of that Japanese Grand Prix weekend, particularly at the start of both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Didn't want to lose the front tyre, didn't want to go down the road because he knew how much was riding on that weekend, and ultimately didn't get those overtakes done early enough in the Grand Prix to have anything for Pecco Bagnaia, whether you believe he could have challenged Pecco Bagnaia or not, whether Pecco was just playing faster last weekend. So it could free him up. He could ride without any burden on his shoulders or any pressure, or he could have just be missing that little 1% of fire in his belly, that little steel to really push to the absolute 11th, 10th. And knowing what we know about Marc Marquez from his previous championships, it's usually the first of those. He usually does just go gangbusters and try and win Grand Prix by as much as possible. We've seen on a few occasions after Marc Marquez has won championships, there are one or two crashes that come with that. I'm sure he is going to want to win this World Championship right the way to the end of the season by doing what he's done all year, which is win and win comfortably. This one of 2 circuits on the calendar, along with Portimao, which is still to come, on this 2025 calendar, which he hasn't won at. And Marc Marquez being a serial record breaker, he's surely aware of that.
And he can, of course, also match and surpass his record for victories in a MotoGP
and a 100th
campaign.
Grand Prix win up for grabs this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty still to play for Marc. But as you rightly say, we see it in plenty of sports. We've seen it from Marc himself sometimes, that given that huge emotional release, all of the mental stress that he went through just last weekend, I don't think it'd be a surprise to anybody if he's unable to reach those levels again, particularly this weekend when it comes so soon afterwards.
Well, I think we got an idea when he crossed the line last weekend of just how much he's put into this. It's not, of course, just one season. It's essentially 5.5 years since that horrible crash in Jerez. All the surgeries that have come through that, across his arm, across the diplopia. He broke his thumb at the beginning of 2023, which was another surgery to factor into that. So he has had to not only overcome so much physical pain, but he's had to cross and clear so many mental and psychological barriers over the last few years. He's put more into this World Championship than any of the previous 6 MotoGP crowns he's taken. Surely any normal human being, which admittedly Marc Marquez isn't, surely anybody would have a little mental drop-off after such an incredible high.
Well, that's the thing. You make the point yourself. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, unfortunately for everybody else, Marc Marquez is not a normal human being. The things he's able to do out on track are like nothing we've ever seen before. So let's see. I think that's the huge question coming into it. I still think right now, despite the performances of Pecco Bagnaia last weekend, which we will get onto, he still comes into the weekend as favourite, do we think?
Yeah, for me, Marc Marquez hasn't won here, but hasn't really had the equipment to win here in any of his previous visits. Of course, one of those big crashes, the big injuries we described, was here back in 2022, that huge warm-up crash. Of course, his Ducati detonated itself here last year when it caught fire when he was in that battle with Di Gianantonio. Pecco Bagnaia, who we'll come on to shortly, even when he has won here, he's never been the fastest here. This was always a Jorge Martin track across the last couple of years. Of course, we're missing Martin this weekend if you're just catching up on the views from last weekend. So Marc Marquez, as I say, this is one of the, I guess, boxes he's got to tick for the rest of the season. I think when you've won that World Championship, when you have reached your Everest in MotoGP, it's up to you then to try and find new ways to motivate yourself. And I think the idea of not only winning at a circuit he hasn't won at, but the opportunity to beat Pecco Bagnaia at Pecco's best, which you can't really say Marc has done this season, I think that might light a fire in him as well.
Absolutely, but I think it's fascinating for us and for all of you guys at home as well, because in the middle of the season, when Marc was on that incredible run, we'd stand here on a Thursday and there was almost just an expectation he was going to go out and take victory. But this weekend in particular, I think there were a lot of question marks surrounding a number of front runners, which hopefully should make a fascinating weekend. Now, let's hear from the man himself, the newly crowned 7-time MotoGP World Champion. I'm sure you at home, like us, were wondering, how were those party celebrations on Sunday night? So, our very own Elliot York put that very question to him.
Party was good. I mean, party always is good, and especially if you have a very good atmosphere as we have in our team. And yeah, still the boys a bit critical. I speak too much these last days with many interviews and many events. A bit tired, I feel tired, but let's see if during the weekend we can recover a bit the energy, and emotional side already more stable.
How are you looking forward to this weekend? It's a circuit I don't think you've finished a race at, one of the only circuits you've not won at. Of course, now the championship pressure is off, it's done, so what's your mindset heading into this one?
Yeah, you know, let's see. First of all, first target is try to come back with the same adrenaline and the same spirit we had during all the year, because it's true that in the past, a long time ago, when I was winning and remind some races, I was like finish the title and want to arrive in the next race to attack and to win. But now the feeling is different. It's like I had enough pressure during last seasons, and I suffered a lot. So now, just I want to enjoy it, but try to understand is without that adrenaline, I can keep the same level of performance.
There was, of course, emotional scenes after the Grand Prix, after your title celebration with Ducati, but also with Honda. I know that team mean a lot to you, obviously so much success, and it was a difficult decision to leave. So have you now you've won, thinking about potentially working with them again in the future? I guess it would be a romantic thing to think about.
I mean, of course, Honda will remain one of the longest team of my career, I think. But and we have an amazing relationship, as you can see in the podium of Motegi. But always I had the same mentality. If you are fast and you are happy and you are smiling in one place, don't change. Let's see. You never know, because sport change from one day to the other. But at the moment, I'm very, very happy, and you know, 3 days ago I won the championship with Ducati, so my mind is full in red.
Thank you, Marc.
So Marc Marquez there saying that although the adrenaline might just drop off, I think talking there on the focus and the concentration, which so often is laser focus, might just be a little bit awry, but he says he wants to just enjoy these last 3 races, and Marc Marquez gets his maximum enjoyment out of winning. So I think from that we can take that he's going to be at his top level. Interesting there as well on a potential future with Honda. I think it's just the romantics in all of us that think or almost expects that maybe in the future, when his career is starting to wind down, that he may well end up back there with a team that helped him so much. But let's touch on Pecco Bagnaia then, because it was mentioned there by Marc. An incredible weekend, an incredible turnaround. On Saturdays previously, going into Japan, he'd finished 13th, 14th, 13th. Then he was on pole position, led every lap of the sprint, led every lap of the Grand Prix. It's the big question. I mean, where on earth did that turnaround come from? There are all kinds of theories floating around at the moment. Have you got your own?
Well, we're giving it our best shot. He has to be on something closer to a 2024 bike. We don't quite know what that ultimately means, whether it's chassis, whether it's something else, but ultimately Pecco Bagnaia has got the feeling back, that mythical feeling that we talk about all the time with MotoGP riders. Very difficult to quantify, but what we saw in Japan last weekend, when he was braking for corners, there was none of that snapping sideways on that Ducati that we saw through all the season. He said, I think the words he phrased were, it feels like my bike again. It feels like a bike that he can fully attack on. And we saw exactly that when Pecco Bagnaia has that, how good he can be. So that's, I think, one of the big questions that we're going to be trying to get answered in the latter part of this season. Because even when we spoke to Mauro Grassilli after the celebrations on the Sunday last weekend in Japan, he was sort of saying, let's see on some other tracks first before we are truly confident that Pecco Bagnaia is back at his 2022 3 and 4 level. Because we've seen him have some very strong weekends this season, and then that form hasn't carried on at all, has it, to the next Grand Prix? It's been very difficult to predict from one weekend to the next whether Pecco Bagnaia is going to be strong or not. This, though, feels much more serious, much more sustainable for Pecco Bagnaia to win in the fashion that he did, to take pole position, to win a sprint, which he hadn't done at all in 2025. And even if Marc Marquez had clear tarmac, I don't think it's by any means certain that Marc could have stayed with or beaten Pecco last weekend, even putting aside his other motives, of course, trying to win the World Championship. Bagnaia was in a class of his own. The only thing that looked like stopping him last weekend were those little tails of smoke coming out of the back of that Ducati, which fortunately didn't lead to anything more serious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we spoke to Mauro Grassilli, he was speaking about his theory was this renewed focus, renewed appetite for success that Pecco had on the Monday of Misano. And I have to say, personally, I don't buy that.
He's had that from the start. He lost the World Championship last year.
Exactly. His talent has gone nowhere. His appetite, his desire for victory has gone nowhere. And in MotoGP, when things are so tight to the front, are so competitive, just from a click in the head, you can't go from finishing outside of the top 10 to suddenly dominating the best riders in the world. It takes something far bigger than that. And I think there are some rumours, Pedro Acosta even referenced it, Fabio Di Giannantonio referenced it as well, that on Monday's Misano test, or let's tell the story in full for Pecco Bagnaia, Sunday night after Misano, maybe rock bottom for him in terms of unable to score any points in a sprint, crashing out of the Grand Prix on home soil, a place where he's dominated at before. Like normal, he didn't come, or against the normality, he didn't come and chat to the media.
Took him about 3 hours, didn't it?
Took about 3 hours. He was in long meetings with Gigi Dall'Igna, with Davide Tardozzi, and from putting pieces together, I think he put an ultimatum on the table and said to them, enough is enough. This cannot go on. All year, I've been asking, give me the GP24, the bike that I know, the bike I know I can perform at. We just have to draw a line under it and move on. And it seems as though Frankie Morbidelli's GP24 was wheeled into the Ducati box on Sunday evening with the GP25 engine bolted into it. And that's where Pecco has refound his confidence from.
And Pecco Bagnaia said after the Grand Prix weekend last weekend, he said he was angry as well as happy, indicating that this was something that they could have tried earlier on the season, almost as if it's something that he'd been asking for earlier in the season, didn't get it until now, and it was like a light switch was suddenly flicked on, wasn't it, for Pecco Bagnaia? He was suddenly the rider we all know he was. And I'm happy for Pecco too, because understandably, one or two have been asking the question whether Pecco Bagnaia is the same rider any longer, whether the sheer gravity of having Marc Marquez in the same team as you has had an effect on Pecco Bagnaia, and ultimately the dominance of Marc, as you say, had broken him. Pecco Bagnaia proved last weekend he is far from broken.
Absolutely, and it certainly sets it up. It came at the perfect time, as of course our attention switches to the 2026 world title fight, to have Bagnaia in that position where we think he can really try take it to Marc next year. Right, unfortunately, one rider that won't be with us on the MotoGP grid next year, confirming a move to World Superbikes and BMW, is five-time MotoGP race winner Miguel Oliveira. Of course, a victory here in that historic very first Indonesian Grand Prix, and I have to say conditions quite a bit different to what we're having today, so we can welcome him in. Miguel, good afternoon. How are you? And well, firstly, congratulations on the move. An exciting one. It was sad to lose you, but I'm sure you're going to have great fun over in World Superbikes.
Yes. An exciting move. Really motivated because it's a big change in my career. Obviously, also a little bit sad to be leaving. I don't want to say a full goodbye, but maybe a see you soon. But yeah, it's an exciting move. I'm really motivated to start getting the feeling on how it's the bike and also the format, and essentially happy to be able to put myself in a position of maybe challenging for podiums and wins. So that's the most exciting part.
You say it's a see you soon. We understand Aprilia were interested in a test rider role. Is that fully off the table, or with the World Superbike calendar as it is, could you maybe try and help them out in the future, looking towards, of course, that huge change in 2027?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I don't want to say goodbye yet, because there is this slight, maybe remote chance, but who knows what can be possible to do in terms of calendar. I think is a huge improvement for me as a rider to be in touch still with the GP bike. I think it can definitely help me to stay in shape for the World Superbike, even though if it's a different bike, but it has a lot of tools and skills that you can develop to the current season and benefit from that. So yeah, who knows.
We don't want to describe this then as the end of your MotoGP career, maybe the end of part one of it coming up at the end of this season. But in terms of, we're seeing some of your greatest moments in MotoGP to this point on screen now. When you look back at your MotoGP adventure to this point, just how much pride do you take from it?
I take a lot of pride, of course, because you know, until you hang the boots, you don't really have much time to see what you have done. But it's true that in MotoGP, that time of reflection came a little bit earlier, as you said. And I'm proud, of course. I'm proud to be able to take the wins. Not many MotoGP riders can say they've actually won some races. I've won in Moto3, in Moto2, and in MotoGP. So of course, I do take pride on that. I feel also I haven't done as much as I've wanted to. I think the timing which I joined certain projects were not maybe the ideal times, but also that 5% of luck was not on my side throughout my MotoGP career since joining in 2019 up until now. But I do take pride on at least the way I've conducted myself in the paddock, in teams. I've made friends with a lot of people, and I've always had a positive impact on everyone which had the chance to get to know me. So I do take pride on that.
We know it's been a really tough couple of years from an injury point of view. I know there's been an awful lot of bad luck for you, but in terms of the challenge that you're ahead of next season, does it feel as if this has come at quite a good time for you? Is this a fresh injection into your career that you welcome?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's hard enough to race in MotoGP, and it's also hard when you know that on your best day, doing the best result you can, doing the best riding, it is to get near a top 10 finish, you know, and that season in and out, that really takes maybe a toll on you, and it's definitely harder and harder to get that magic out of you, that inspiration, that maybe the last 15% that you have to put that the bike doesn't have, you know. And I think as a fresh injection of motivation for me to join another series and to go to a place which I know on paper has high chances to fight for wins and championships. So of course that really ultimately is what drives me. I know here we race the best machines with the best technology, but still I see the bike as a tool to enjoy myself and to win races. That's what I'm looking most forward to.
Just finally, coming back to Mandalika, I imagine you have great memories from that day in 2022, as I was just saying to Lewis, in conditions quite a bit different to what we've got today.
Honestly, bittersweet, because the last year I got a broken wrist in FP1, so coming here is definitely bittersweet just because of it. I know I won in 22 just as the season was starting on that rainy conditions, a little special Sunday. But I do take pride of that, and I think all Indonesia a little bit remembers that win. So yeah, made a good following here of fans, and everyone seems to enjoy seeing me, and obviously MotoGP. So I'll just try to make it up for them this weekend.
Absolutely. Well, good luck for the future, and have fun one this weekend.
Thank you.
There we go. Great to chat with Miguel, as always, who's going to get stuck in these final 5 rounds. And interesting there, he's not closing the door to potentially a bit of a dual role next year, which you have to say, getting on to Aprilia, you feel they really have to do, because this weekend you reference the fact that Jorge Martin isn't here as a result of that broken collarbone from the crash at the start of the sprint last weekend. No Ayagura as well, again for him having been ruled out the Japanese Grand Prix. They are very depleted, and you look at them trying to put a World Championship challenge together with Marco Bezzecchi and Jorge Martin next year. Their test squad, taking nothing away from Lorenzo Savadori, is pretty weak in comparison to the other factories, just mainly down to manpower. You look at the other factories and they've got 2-3 guys ready to go. Lorenzo Savadori has had to do so much work this year by himself. He really needs some support.
Yeah, it's a combination, isn't it, of quality and quantity from Aprilia's point of view. Because you look at all of the other factories pretty much in MotoGP, you also need 2 test riders now, never mind 1, and you need 2 high-quality MotoGP riders. Take Yamaha, for instance. You've got Augusto Fernandez, who's only just off a MotoGP bike at the end of last season, straight into a test rider role for them in this season. And of course, he's got a key role in terms of developing their V4 into next season. And it's been the story of Aprilia's 2025, hasn't it? They've, I think, only on one occasion, that occasion was last weekend in Japan, have they been able to really put their full 100% rider lineup out on the racetrack, the quartet that we saw last weekend. Boy, does that sum up Jorge Martin's season, just when he was getting some momentum back into his campaign, just as he was telling us that the excuses were over. He was in a position now to fully compete at the peak of his powers, and if he wasn't, that was on him. Another injury now sets him back in his progress. And ultimately, Aprilia, as you say, are coming here with 50% of their rider lineup down, and no team or factory wants to be doing that. And of course, as you say, from a test rider's point of view, when we're going into a transition of regulations for 2027, the test rider role is potentially the most important role in a MotoGP team now. Looking ahead to 2027, one of them isn't enough.
Yeah, and the other factories, Ducati aside, have got MotoGP race winners, MotoGP podium finishers, so that is an area where you feel that Aprilia do need to invest and do need to improve if they are to take the fight to Ducati at the moment. Let's touch on Marco Bezzecchi then, because it was a great recovery through to 4th, was it, in the end, on Sunday, behind Joan Mir, who we'll touch on as well before we speak to them in the press conference. Pecco Bagnaia's turnaround in form certainly won't help his chances of finishing 3rd in the World Championship, but again, despite a difficult Saturday and qualifying further down the grid than what we've been seeing of late, he still showed that his pace on a Sunday is as good as anybody's out there. And Bez, I still think, even despite Pecco's turnaround in form, will feel that he's still in that fight for 3rd.
Yeah, Pecco Bagnaia might have got a lot stronger after the events last weekend, but Marco Bezzecchi hasn't got any weaker.
No.
Even if the result might not necessarily agree with that. Ultimately, Q2 was a bit of a disaster from Bezzecchi's point of view. Should not have been starting anywhere near the 3rd row of the grid, and ultimately is a bit of a knock-on effect. That's what put him in the line of fire when Jorge Martin had his problems. Just stands to reason, the further back you start, the more likely you're going to find yourself in some trouble at the first corner. And in fairness as well, Marco Bezzecchi was nowhere near 100% in the Grand Prix last Sunday. He was beaten up badly in that crash with his teammate at the start of the sprint. So for him to come through from there and still take a 4th place underlines the quality he's got as a rider. And it feels like we've got a genuine situation in MotoGP nowadays where Ducati, KTM and Aprilia have all got genuine race-winning potential, both from their bike but also from their rider fleet as well. Pedro Acosta, of course, nearly won this Grand Prix last season. And I've got a sneaky suspicion that here this weekend, in addition to Honda, that Yamaha might be fancying the chances too. Yeah,
they need a big weekend. They've been few and far between since the summer break, as that V4 inline 4 debate has almost overshadowed the performances on track. But we need to touch on Honda before we go to the press conference. Joan Mir will be quite rightly in it after that remarkable performance last Sunday. Honda's first dry podium in what must have felt like an eternity. They have been at rock bottom. Last year, the worst year in the company's illustrious history in this World Championship. But since the summer break in particular, that bike is completely transformed and is a seriously competitive package now. But take nothing away, the bike is good, but Joan Mir was very good as well last weekend.
Yeah, I guess if you're drawing the comparison between Honda and Yamaha have got a rider in Fabio Quartararo who is lifting that factory up on his back and lifting them to results by performing probably at a level above the motorcycle. Honda, I think, would be looking at Joan Mir saying, you're our world champion, it's on you to do that for us as well and to bring us back towards the front again. He did that in Japan, no question about that. Qualifying on the front row of the grid, it only took the best of Pecco Bagnaia to beat him on Saturday morning in qualifying. And the best thing you could say about Joan Mir is that it looked like he belonged at the front of the field, didn't he, throughout both the sprint and the Grand Prix. It wasn't a case case of qualifying well and then hitting reverse gear in the Grand Prix itself. He stuck around at the front, clearly had the superior pace and tyre management to Pedro Acosta. As the Grand Prix got underway, Acosta had his problems, which ultimately led him dropping out of the points altogether. So it was a third purely on merit for Joan Mir. There was no fortune, there was no attrition, no riders crashing ahead of him, no weather. It was a straight up third place behind the 2 factory Ducatis. You can't say fairer than that.
And Joan has been at rock bottom as well. The factory have obviously had their struggles, but Joan, through a number of crashes and injuries in 2023, there were serious rumours that Joan was thinking of taking a break. He needed some time away from the sport to really fall back in love with it again, because things had gotten so dark and so desperate for him. So the manner in which he has battled back to prove to everyone why he won that World Championship and to be up there at the front, I think was great to see for everybody included. Let's just finally touch on KTM then, because you've just said what we said a week ago, that we went into the Japanese Grand Prix with real high hopes of Pedro Acosta taking the fight to Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia at the front. He did that on Saturday, but on Sunday, the problems which have plagued KTM in these testing non-European events where temperatures can soar. We saw the troubles they had in Thailand at the start of the year, and they came back and bit them in the backside big time in Japan. The rear tyre was burnt up within use, completely out of any working use, and in the end to drop outside of the points, was it, or just inside the points?
17th he finished.
What a calamitous Sunday for Pedro Acosta and KTM, given how strong they looked throughout the weekend.
And given that Pedro Acosta was the only KTM with a shred of competitiveness in Japan last weekend, the others had their various problems. So for Pedro Acosta, we spoke to him earlier on in the media scrums. It's not an interview that you'll be able to see, but we were at his media scrum earlier on. And I said to him straight away, great track for you this. And Pedro Acosta essentially said that they haven't got the faintest clue, really. When they come to a racetrack, they don't know themselves ultimately how strong they're going to be, because the previous history for them isn't really relevant. It's a very different KTM now that is ridden in a very different way. But as you said there, it's very easy to see where their weaknesses are. They cannot get a rear tyre to the end of the Grand Prix. Of course, they also had chatter issues across Maverick Vinales' bike. Of course, he's still suffering from his various physical issues, getting back to full fitness. Costa wasn't exactly slow last weekend, but fast on one lap and fast in a sprint is only so much. Ultimately, in a race where he said he felt like he was managing, he didn't feel like he was torturing his rear tyre and putting it through some serious hammering. He thought he was being kind to it, but the rear tyre was gone at half distance.
Well, he said he did everything that was asked of me by the team in terms of applying the right engine mapping at the right time, in terms of how much throttle he was applying at certain moments. He was being very kind to that tyre, but even still, it was destroyed at around half race distance, quite alarmingly as well. The positive news for Pedro is that he feels that this circuit in particular is not going to be too harsh on the tyres. Of course, they do switch here to the harder casing that Michelin bring for these real super high temperature, high test of the rear tyres. So that potentially should help him ever so slightly. But as you say, I mean, how unnerving, how unsettling is that for someone like Acosta with his talent coming to a venue where he had so much success last year, and he just doesn't know, none of the team know, until they get out on track, if this is a place where they can be competitive or not.
Yeah, it's always a bad sign when a rider says it, and it's just as bad a sign when a team says it. If you don't know why you're fast, ultimately that's a problem, because you're not going to know why you're slow either. And ultimately, how do you go about fixing a problem with your bike if you've got no idea ultimately what the problem is? So yeah, KTM, it's clear that they have made some serious progress since the summer break. We can't forget how big a hole they were in the first half of the season, but clear from last weekend, particularly with every other manufacturer on the right day looking like they could put a podium challenge together, it's clear where KTM still need to improve.
Absolutely. Let's see if those improvements can come over these final 5 rounds of the year and going into the start of next year. Of course, it's going to be a huge year for KTM 2026, so they try and keep hold of their wonder boy in Pedro Acosta, whose contract, like everyone else pretty much, runs up at the end of 2026. But we'll focus on these final 5 rounds of the year. The World Championship may well be wrapped up by Marc Marquez, but there is still plenty to play for. A resurgent Pecco Bagnaia tries to stamp his authority once again on this World Championship and take with him some much-needed momentum going into 2026. Are Honda officially back at the top of the sport, or at least able to challenge at the top of the sport for the first time in what must feel like 5 or 6 years? And of course, a huge weekend we have to mention as well for the Pertamina Enduro VR46 squad. Frankie Morbidelli in the press conference joining us in just a moment. And if you don't believe us that it's a big weekend, then take a flight to Lombok and walk through the airports. Their faces are plastered everywhere. And they had a big event in Jakarta with Valentino Rossi, which certainly drew more than a few thousand people as well. Right, let's crack on with it then and hear from three men that are no doubt going to start this weekend. Bagnaia, Mir and Morbidelli kick off this Indonesian Grand Prix alongside Matt Burt.